Hey, welcome to the first official episode of the Namespace podcast. Hopefully you tuned in for episode 0 where we introduced ourselves. For those of you that didn't, I'm Derek and this is my co-host.
I'm Jordan.
And we're going to tackle a very important topic, or at least we think it's important.
Yes.
It's something that we've both talked about a lot. You want to introduce it?
Sure. So The topic is, should product owners know how to code, or should they have some sort of technological background, some experience as a software developer?
All right. What's your gut reaction?
So my gut reaction is, yes, that sounds great. I would love to have a very technical product owner. That's a path I'm considering. And right now as a software developer, I keep thinking, wow, all this, I'm going to have all this knowledge of code and then become a product owner. And that'll be so helpful. But of course, a lot of product owners don't have that background, and a lot of them are still great. So that's what we're going to talk about.
So my gut reaction was very much the same. And I kind of group product owner, product management together. I know they have separate functions within the team. But for me, it was always, shouldn't these people have some sort of a technical background, whether it's doing the design stuff or QA or engineering itself?
Yeah.
And over the years, I have actually changed my opinion on that. And while I appreciate the ones that do, I don't think it should be any kind of a requirement or need. And kind of the reasoning behind that, especially within the agile methodology, what product ownership is supposed to be doing is describing the problem to the engineers. So they should be working the problem space with desired outcomes in the solution space and not designing the solution for them. And I feel like those with an engineering background tend to do more of the solution solving than working in the problem space. And there's been a couple of instances recently even where I've seen where a solution was handed to engineers where the engineers needed to kind of say no to it. But product owners, they get the last say in it, and it didn't end well. Well, I don't think it ended well because I didn't get my way, and I'm like that. Okay.
Right. Well, yeah, definitely. Whenever you're a product owner, your main goal is to write, user stories based on what the customer is looking for. So new features or new things that the customer is interacting with, and the customer isn't writing code. They don't care what the code looks like. They just want a feature. So it makes sense whenever you are writing a user story to not solution, to just say what is needed. But I would say that's for the most part, because there's definitely a lot of tickets in our backlog that are just tasks and tech debt and I would say like stories, I guess not stories, but just tickets in there that don't involve the customer. And I guess in hindsight, it's like those aren't the ones that are usually written by the product owner. So there's a question. Should all tickets be written by the product owner? Right. So I think that all user stories where it is something that a customer is interacting with directly, I think it makes sense that the product owner would write all of those or at least approve them. Maybe you have a conversation if you think of a feature that you think would be helpful. But then when it comes to like tech debt sort of tasks, just like changing the way something was implemented or a refactor, if you have a product owner that's not very technical, it seems like, or even if you do have a product owner that's technical, it seems like those would be written by the team. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. So, especially for tech debt things, the product owner is probably not looking at the code, not doing code reviews, any of that kind of stuff. It's not their role or responsibility to do that. So, for them to effectively write the ticket, they couldn't, no matter what technical background they had or not. I don't have a hard, fast rule or like these types of tickets this person writes, these types of tickets that person writes, because you have situations where a product owner might be writing the spec for a public API or something like that, and they kind of do need to know some engineering stuff.
Yes.
Like they need to know about response codes and when they should be returned, what this response code actually means. What's the proper use of a response code? One of the things I've seen engineers do before is return a response code for a specific exception, and that's not really what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
But, it's one of those where the product owner should know some technical stuff, but here I am saying I don't think that they need to know it. And I guess the reason I'm saying that is in the agile ceremonies, and forgive me, I don't know all of like the actual names. You have the retrospective, which is like the meta review of the whole sprint, the refinement, which is where product ownership, product management, engineers sit down and like they're looking over the tickets, they're assigning points to them, whatever pointing system you've decided to use. And I feel like at that time, that's when the product owner has written the tickets, described the problem that's being encountered, and proposed a solution for it. And that's where engineering gets to say, well, that's not a solution that's going to work for X, Y, and Z, or, that's a bad security practice, which is one that I saw recently where product ownership got that ticket through. And it's a partnership where product ownership won't need the technical background, because during the refinement, that's when we are supplementing their knowledge of the system and the capabilities of our tech stack and our platform. So they don't need any technical expertise, but then the engineers also need to know how to speak product to the product owners as well. Otherwise you have this massive disconnect, and that's how you get behind on things, or security vulnerabilities come in. And then, God, what's that third ceremony? Sprint planning, which is when you break up and say like, these are the things we can bring into a 2-week sprint and all of that. And again, it's one of those cases where the product owner could really benefit from knowing how the system is architected and designed, that knows, oh, well, I have to get this, repository in or something like that before I can write the controller that's going to have to access that data. But it's, again, engineering's in that meeting, and they know how the system is designed and architected, and so they should be providing that feedback as well. So I think in the perfectly well-oiled machine, product ownership isn't going to need any kind of technical expertise. Okay, I'm making up my hard, fast rule. Here's my hard, fast rule. And I'm going to experiment with it over the next few weeks. Maybe I'll report back how it works. So product ownership, doesn't need the technical expertise, but they write the tickets. During sprint refinement, engineering supplements that. And during sprint planning, again, they supplement it by saying, these are the things that have to come first. And then any kind of tech debt task type work, that the genesis of that work has come from a design decision or technology change that the product owner wouldn't necessarily be aware of. would get written by engineering, but would still have to pass through the eyes of product ownership to decide when that gets addressed. So I think that's my hard fast. I'm afraid to say that.
Well, because it's difficult for a product owner to know how important some sort of task or tech debt is, or how much benefit it's going to have without a technical background. Even if the engineers are explaining like, this is going to help us so much for these reasons, it will make this other ticket easier. It'd still be nice for the product owner to have some sort of realization or some being able to agree because they agree versus just having to give in like, okay, well, if you guys say that you need to do this. So I think for that reason, it's nice. And
I would say the important bit on that long rant I just had was engineers need to be able to speak a little bit of product.
Yes.
And product ownership needs to be able to speak a little bit engineering to really have an effective mix, no matter what your backgrounds are.
Yeah. So for a while now, we've been talking about writing the stories, organizing the stories, planning the sprint. But another key point of being a product owner is at the end of the sprint, you are saying, like, you look at the you get the little demo, right? You get the little demo and you'd say, yes, like this was completed properly. I like this. So I guess for the demo, those are only going to be like the user stories that the product owner writes, like we're talking about. And for these tech debt things, they just get done and the product owner doesn't have to approve them then because they're not technical and they don't care as long as it's done. Is that kind of what you're thinking on that route? Because if the product owner is only writing stories that are less technical, then they should only have to approve those same stories.
For tech debt, especially, regression tests should be your approval process. Like if the regression tests pass, assuming your regression tests are good, then okay, why do you need product ownership to go in and look at that?
Right.
I guess that's also kind of the role of an architect on a team. I've heard it said that product ownership makes sure the right thing is built, and a software architect makes sure the thing is built right. And so if you really play to those strengths of those roles or the purpose of those roles, I guess the architect would have to be the one approving that a refactor or task was properly done. And that would happen not during the demo, but during the code review. Right.
Yeah. So that's another kind of another topic, like the role of the architect there. Because I mean, lately, at least on the team I'm on right now, there's not really a strong architect presence. So when you're making like decisions like that, of course, there's some team discussion during discussing the ticket and pointing it and sprint planning and whatnot. But yeah, that's another interesting topic about how like the role of the architect, and because there's, I guess, different types of architects, like ones that don't interact with the code at all. They just make sure that your services are laid out properly and interacting properly. But then, like you're saying, there's people who might want to oversee the code structure and the different classes that you're using and different design patterns, maybe, or just more, I guess, lower level than just the services you're using.
Yeah. So for me, the architect is one of the most ambiguously defined roles, because I have talked to and worked with some architects who are just some of the best coders that I've gotten to work with. Very intelligent, very clean code, understands everything about the system, just a great technical depth. And even has great product knowledge as to why they did all of this stuff. And they're submitting PRs and things. And then I've also worked with and talked with a couple of architects who are like, oh yeah, I just have a good concept of organization and designing things, and I've never written code like ever. And if I had my preference, I'm going to take the guy that is highly knowledgeable in the technical aspects of everything. But it's just one of those things. It's like, it's crazy. How can you have an architect who doesn't write code?
Yeah, that's a little bit more extreme than a product owner who doesn't write code to me. Because I would say kind of a similar bit there for me. It's like I would probably prefer a product owner with more technical experience. I feel like having those conversations may be easier when you're trying to decide whether or not something is important enough to go into a sprint, or if it should be moved up in the backlog, or if it depends on this other thing. But then, yeah, with the architect, it's like, definitely, if that would seems like you would want an architect who knows how to write code.
For me, yeah.
Yeah, I
really
haven't worked with one who doesn't. So
yeah. Okay. So there's another thing that people disagree. And it was really weird because the architect that doesn't write code is the one that said architects should also have the responsibility of mentoring like the junior devs and mid-level devs, really any dev, on design patterns and best practices and stuff. But I'm like, how do you do that without writing code?
yeah, that's very strange.
This one architect I worked with who was highly knowledgeable, and like just from looking at the system he designed, I learned so much, and I took so much away from that position with me. He was like, oh yeah, just be curious. Like, I'm not here to teach you anything. And it's like how those two roles worked. And then their philosophy on how you disseminate that knowledge to the rest of the team just seemed to be reversed. And I don't know. So we've totally switched off of product ownership.
Yeah. Well, we can go back on that for a moment.
Okay. I don't mean to do the hard switch because I'm very interested in that as well.
Yeah. I think both are good to talk about.
If you haven't finished on product ownership.
Yeah. I have one more topic on product ownership that I think would be cool to discuss. And then we could talk about the architect thing a little bit more because I think they play in together.
But as we've been talking, I've kind of come to the understanding that the perfect system is the product owner and the architect are meeting to help put in tickets that are user stories or tech debt.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah. That being said, that's not always going to happen because architects are expensive. Yeah. One of the highest paid positions in, the engineering career track. So not every company is going to hire an architect, let alone a dedicated architect.
Yeah, but that does sound like a good system there. The product owner,
I'm sorry.
Architect.
I keep interrupting.
No, you're
go
good.
back to what you wanted to talk about with product owners.
Yeah. So I thought of another kind of another way to discuss that. So because we're talking about customer feedback, kind of product owners writing user stories based on what they want done, not how to do it. It should be like what's it called? Like black box type. Is that what?
Black box, like black box testing?
Yeah, but like they don't care about what's going on inside. They just want to see the result.
Yeah, that's what you'd consider a black box, where you don't know what went on in the system. You just saw what went in and what came out. So
that's kind of like a product owner. You say like what you want the result to be. Here's the result. But what about products that don't have a UI, products that aren't necessarily for a customer? They're like some sort of internal thing, like the project we worked on together, where it's just an intermediary. It's like a big piece of code, and it doesn't have anything to do with like immediate customer satisfaction. Every single ticket is just some sort of tech debt thing. Do you need a product owner? I mean, you do, right? But in that case, they have to be technical, right?
Yeah, that's that's a really special case. So I'm gonna skirt that and go to another application I worked on. This was at Trader Interactive, is their ETL platform, and there was no external consumers or customers of this platform. It was only internal services that took that. So well, what happened was a bunch of data was ingested from dealers for trucks and motorcycles and RVs and stuff. And then it went through the ETL platform, which did some enrichment and massaging of the data so it was in the right formats, et cetera, typical ETL stuff. And then it published it to an API, which was then queried for the various sites. And so technically, the only people that used that were the API developers within the company. And in that case, like, do you need product ownership? Technically, yeah, because and really how that worked is you had the product owner from whichever site would be consuming it, telling us like, this is what the ETL platform needs to send. And they didn't really have product owners at the time for us. It was project management kind of doing a dual role. And so they also got to talk with like the business development people who were like, well, this is how this customer is going to be providing data. And so that's how we got the inputs, outputs for product. And in that case, yeah, you absolutely need some sort of product ownership. Or, okay, let's be honest, you don't ever need product ownership. It just helps a lot.
It's very good. Or at least someone has to pretend to be the product owner.
Right, yeah. Somebody,
like someone on the
somebody
team
has to own the product.
Yeah.
It's very important for a successful product.
Yeah. I guess like the one we worked on that was kind of internal. We didn't really, we basically just had an architect, which that worked fine. But it's still, I still think that having a product owner and an architect.
Yeah, but so we had an architect that was architecting a system to translate from a system designed by a different architect to talk to a system designed by a team of different architects.
Yeah, that was a lot.
That was not really user facing at all. In fact, this thing was meant to be completely invisible. And that one, I don't know what exactly should have been done. The scope that this thing had to cover was far too large for a single architect, of course. And I'm saying like the full life cycle from the three things with different architects. For a single product owner to handle that seems too much, but it also kind of fits in that window that ETL platform I worked on did, where you could have a product owner for each of the three things that were involved. And those so there's a thing called Scrum of Scrums. And so that's when you have these cross-functional teams that are all going to have their own Scrum process. But when system A is relying on system B or, whatever, that needs to be communicated in the Scrum of Scrums, where you divvy out, these are the things that have to get done in this order. And so we are prioritizing them this way for the sub scrum or the team scrum. And so in that case, yeah, I think product ownership in that way, doing a Scrum of Scrums would probably have eased some of the pains we had. But it was such a highly technical
they have to have a technical, because if you're figuring out like the order that these different pieces need to be created.
Well, the architects would have been involved as well.
And you need someone technical helping run it.
Yeah, and that's, oh my God, that's such a specific use case. But
yeah, well, it was
fun. It was a great time.
But it's similar to the internal API thing that you were talking about, where there's no customer facing. The product owner just needs to know what inputs or outputs are necessary, and it's still mildly technical. Even just like knowing how API response codes work, or like how the request might I guess the product owner would say how it should be formatted, and so it's a little bit of technical.
It's actually interesting that we've come to this question, because I'm actually working on a team now that is essentially an ETL platform again, that has no external customer facing stuff. We take things in from data science and we do some data enrichment and we output that to a research team. And there is no product ownership involved. And in this case, there's not really project management involved. There is engineers and engineering management, which leaves me in the role of being product owner as well. So
you're writing tickets? Is everybody writing tickets?
Yep. So we write tickets. We go through the Scrum process, but we're also responsible for like the communication with the other teams to find out requirements, like what do you need, what are you giving us.
Wow.
And it kind of reminded me of something that a company I interviewed with did, and I wish I could remember exactly the phrase they used to describe it, but it's feature ownership, basically. So if you're taking in this particular set of data and you're doing all of the work through the ETL platform and then giving it to this other team, that is your feature, and you take ownership of that entire feature from its planning, its design, its implementation, to ideally eventually its death, where you don't need this product anymore. So you basically switch the feature off. You remove the code from the code base, and you have a single engineer that owns that responsibility. And I've only been doing it about a month and a half at this point, but I'm actually kind of enjoying it. I have my frustrations with it, but see, now I'm switching my opinion again. I guess product owners should be technical so they can do that. I don't have a good answer.
Well, I hadn't heard of that process. I think that's pretty interesting. I'd heard a little bit about feature ownership, but that like to replace a product owner, I hadn't really heard of. It seems a little bit strange that like every single meeting that you're having, it's like, if it's a meeting about the whole product, it's like you kind of all got to be there because nobody knows what kind of questions they're going to ask about what features, or if somebody has a question about a specific feature, it's like the whole team has to ask each other, who did this part, instead of there's just being that one point of contact. It seems a little bit I think inefficient, but like the conversation.
It works best for an internal only app. Like that. Yeah. Public facing, you definitely don't want customers talking to engineers.
That's a good point.
That's a recipe for disaster. So I'm not advocating for that at all. But for an internal product, I've been kind of enjoying it. Ask me in a month or two, see if I still enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still have no idea if product ownership should have technical expertise.
I think a good conclusion for that could be it depends on the project. Some projects, a project that is completely customer facing, it is not needed. A project that is internal and has, it's the requirements are all based on APIs or other interfaces. Maybe those, a little bit of technical experience is important. So I guess maybe it kind of depends on the project. And I would say it's always preferred, except for the thing you're mentioning where a product owner maybe is trying to solution more than they should when they have that technical experience. So there's also that potential issue if a product owner has a lot of technical experience and they want to take on the architect role, kind of, they're trying to solution, that could be a problem.
Yeah. I guess if I had to leave it at anything, what I'd leave it at is you don't have to have the technical background, like a CS degree or something.
Or like previous experience as a software developer.
Right. But you have to have the ability to learn technical concepts and communicate with highly technical people, being your engineers. And in that vein, yeah, you do have to have some technical acumen. Is acumen the correct word? I feel like acumen's the... I don't know that. I believe that's the correct word. I believe I'm using it correct. I'm not an English teacher. Yeah, so you got to have some technical acumen. And on the other hand, I think engineers need some product acumen.
Yes.
And I think there's a huge gap in that area in just software development in general, which is why you see LinkedIn publish a lot of stuff, and some of these very successful tech entrepreneurs that are saying the most desired skill in 2019, 2020, whatever given year is soft skills, communication, leadership, that kind of stuff. And being able to talk product for engineers, I think you'll just increase your value. There's my little tidbit on, your next pay raise. Be able to talk product.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's good. And I mean, we touched a little bit about architects. I don't know if we want to talk about that more, have a different topic where we talk more about the role of an architect. And
I think we know an architect that would be willing to talk with us.
Oh, and
yeah. I am going to defer further conversation and hopefully have another interview.
So that would be great.
Yeah. So anyhow, I think we're going to sum it up. Thanks for hanging out with us again.
Yeah.
I hope you learned a lot. If you have thoughts on product ownership, having technical backgrounds or not, any experiences, you heard a little bit about some of mine, reach out to us. Let us know. namespace.pod@gmail.com. We want to hear from you.
Yes. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And soon, YouTube.
And YouTube, yeah.
All right. Thanks for hanging out.